Hey, Meadowview family, it's Monday morning, and I just wanted to put together a little bit of a video to recap some of the things that we talked about yesterday, add a few things in, some of the things that we just didn't have time to get to in Daniel 1. I'm excited to be in Daniel. There's some exciting stories. The narratives in Daniel are just they're remarkable, and it's remarkable because at one level we're looking at Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, and we're amazed at their faith, and it's a challenge to us in our present situation. But the other level of remarkability that it really always comes back to is the fact that Yahweh is faithful to His people, and that's what I want us to see throughout the entirety of the book. That's why that subtitle is His dominion is an everlasting dominion. Because it really is, as is the whole of Scripture, the story of God's plan to redeem people. And it's a display of His character that we see in every story. And so we see that certainly in chapter 1. It's, as we talked about yesterday, it's that quiet sovereignty. He's not sitting there shutting the mouths of lions, but He's there. He gave Jehoiakim into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, recognizing that this is something that was prophesied. He gave Daniel favor and compassion, and again, that word favor is that word chesed that is so significant because it reminds us of the covenant faithfulness of God to His people, and that certainly is shown to Daniel and to Israel. That concluding part of the chapter, that line that says, "And Daniel served to Cyrus," was there, is that reminder that Babylon would fall, Persia would come to power, but what remained is the faithfulness of God to His people, because they would be returned from their captivity to Israel, or back to their homeland. And then we know the Persians would fall, and the Greeks would fall, and the Romans would fall, and we'll be dealing with some of those things as we move through the remainder of the book together. One of the things that I wanted to point out, there's a couple nerd things in here. I talked about how the Babylonians would assimilate different cultures into their own culture. And in the Bible, in the Old Testament particularly, the Babylonians have a couple of names. They're known as the Chaldeans and the Babylonians. And I found it interesting as I was looking through some of that stuff. Why the Chaldeans? Well, that was originally a term for a particular ruling ethnic group within the nation of Babylon. They would enter southern Babylon in about 850 BC, and by the mid 700s, they had really taken over the throne. There's kings that are even named in this, but they quickly assimilated into the Babylonian culture, even themselves, even though they're the ruling ones. And so this was the mighty military force. As a matter of fact, when God is warning Habakkuk about the army that's coming, it's the Chaldeans. He doesn't use the term Babylonians. It's the Chaldeans. But it just shows that even these thriving factions that would come into this particular kingdom of Babylon would assimilate themselves under that particular title of being a part of Babylon. And I think that will play out because, as I mentioned yesterday, we're in Babylon, and the story of the Bible from the Tower of Babel and on, we're recognizing because Babylon's lineage is as far back as Nimrod, and there's so much that goes to that, and we obviously see Babylon mentioned in Revelation, and so we recognize that it's not that same kingdom, but it is that larger concept of this is what is the anti of the kingdom of Yahweh. And so anyway, I found that a little bit fascinating to see the history there of the Chaldeans and the Babylonians and how that was put together. And then the other thing that I mentioned was the names. Daniel's name was changed. Hananiah's name was changed. Mishael and Azariah, their names were changed. Daniel's his Hebrew name means God judges or God is judge. Belteshazzar, which is the name that he's given in Babylon. May the lady protect the king. And these are, again, there's give or take, there's disagreement on these things, but it seems to be a reference to the goddess Ishtar. Or it could mean this: may he, Marduk or Nebu, which is the son of Marduk, protect his life. And so that would be an Akkadian understanding of it. And so again, there's linguists and scholars that speculate to these things, but we do know that the significance exists there because their names were representative of Yahweh, and now as they're being indoctrinated into Babylon, their names are representing the pagan gods of the world. Hananiah, his name means Yahweh is gracious, and that's a really great name. But his name was changed to Shadrach. I am very much afraid is what people suggest. It's possibly Persian, possibly Akkadian, but most believe it's a garbled pronunciation of Marduk, Shadrach, Marduk, something that would signify in that particular direction. Mishael, his Hebrew name is Who is What God Is, and his name was changed to Meshach. The suggestion here seems a little light, but I am insignificant, which I thought, man, what did that poor guy do to deserve that? And then Azariah, which again is a great name when represented in Hebrew because it means Yahweh helps. Yahweh helps. And his name is changed to Abednego, which most believe to be servant of Nabu, is the name there. And Nabu, again, is the son of Marduk, who is the primary god in that Babylonian kingdom. And so subsequently in the narratives, these names, the Babylonian names of these four men tend to be used in the overtly Babylonian contexts that we find, like the fiery furnace, while in other settings when the narrator seems to be talking about them, he uses their Hebrew names. And so we'll see that those things are used interchangeably throughout the text. And so again, those are just a couple of areas that I didn't really have time to talk about, and I just wanted to share in a little more detail. There's some deeper studies, especially on those names, just some incredible material that's out there, but it's significant, and I just wanted to encourage you with that as well. As we concluded, we really talked about a couple of different things. One was the fact that Yahweh is sovereign, and that his kingdom is the kingdom that will remain forever. That's what that final moniker statement, that editorial note that says Daniel was there through Cyrus. It just reminds us that the kingdoms of the world will rise and fall, but it is the kingdom of Christ that will remain. And we are awaiting the final fulfillment of that kingdom when Jesus will come and establish the kingdom. And so there's all sorts of different takes on when that happens and how that fits together in these timelines of what's called eschatological events. And we're going to talk through some of those things at some point in this series. But in a nutshell, it's just easier to summarize and just say, hey, we're awaiting the return of Jesus to see the fulfillment of his kingdom, though we are representatives of that kingdom right here in our own Babylon. We are exiles, and I think this is where I would encourage you, read 1 Peter this week. 1 Peter is written to the exiles and the sojourners. It's written to us who are without a kingdom in a sense here. And so there's a lot of wonderful instruction that's given there regarding that. The other point that we made was this, that in our circumstances of life, our trials don't make sense. We see this sliver of time that we're in, but we have to realize that God sees the full story. When we look at stories like Daniel, we see the whole of the story. Daniel did not in the moment. And so we have to remember that we respect and we honor Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah because of their faith in God in this particular trial. We want to have that same kind of faith, and so we need to pray that God would strengthen our faith as we move through the various trials of life that don't make sense to us either. One of the points that I hope you get to talk over with your small groups this week is one that we really didn't even get to, and that's this point that God's grace is sufficient in the trial. That's this point that's made in the text that God gave favor and compassion to Daniel in this situation, and God gave in in the situation with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. He gave them everything that they needed. He gave them the wisdom and the knowledge, and he wants to give those things to us as well. He's a God who gives liberally, and he provides for us in our times of trial and need. And so, wherever you're at, whatever you're going through, cry out to help. Cry out for the supplies that you need, that God would give you those things. And then finally, the point that I would just close with is these guys, man, they are worthy of honor. They are men of faith. Really, at this point in time, they're boys of faith. These are still very young men, yet they seem to have a faith that as you look through Scripture, it seems unmatched. And we certainly get the good stories. I'm sure they all had their difficult days and their days of struggle, but they're not the heroes of the story. That's always important to point out. But they are noble, and in a couple of ways that I want to point that out. And again, I hope this is a point that can be discussed in your group. One would be they're noble in their conviction. These guys draw a line in the sand, and there is room for disagreement on this. Some of you will probably hold fast to say, no, they wanted to maintain dietary laws as Moses had established, or they wanted to maintain a separation from the pagan worship, and I'm certain those things would even be true. Where I kind of took more of an arbitrary approach, that they were just tired of being told what to do in Babylon, and so they set this standard. They drew a line in the sand and said, no, here's what we're going to eat, so that we can remember and represent Yahweh in this strange land, in this land of exile. And so I love their conviction in this. I love that they're taking this particular stand. And we need to do the same. We need to think about this world of exile that we live in. Or we are exiles in this world that we live in, would be the better way to say that. And how are we distinct? Well, the primary way we're supposed to be distinct is in the same way Jesus was distinct. The fruit of his life. We see that. And Galatians tells us that we're to display love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control, and other places adding things like humility. And so we recognize that as we display that fruit of Christ, we look different than the world around us. And so we should constantly be working to be faithful in conforming to Christ in the way in which we live our lives. I want to be a husband who loves. I want to be a parent who loves. I want to be a neighbor who loves. And again, working on those things. And as we live that, there's a distinctiveness about our life. But there's also an area here where I think Christian liberty can be pulled in, because this is where people draw different lines in the sand. I find it interesting in the story. Daniel and these three, they drew this line, and they said, okay, this is how we're going to be distinct. You flip to Esther, who does come a little bit later, it would seem, in time, but she, because of her particular situation, conforms as much as she can into the culture of Babylon, because they're trying to kill the Jews. And so there's this different set of circumstances. I don't think the Bible paints that either one of them are wrong in the direction that they approached. And that's why I say this is quite possibly this issue of Christian liberty that we're dealing with. And so I just think of, in our present culture as Christians, there are some entertainment choices that we should make that are distinctive. We should not engage in all of the entertainment choices that the world would engage in. And so that's where everybody is going to draw different lines, I think, in certain areas here. Alcohol is another good one that we've even talked about recently, because it is a line in the sand to say, hey, here's one area of life where I am going to live distinctly from the world. I'm not going to participate in alcohol. And so honestly, that's one of the lines that I've personally drawn in my life. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. But one of those reasons is I think it is a distinctiveness that I'm okay with in that particular area. So there's other ways that we can do this, but I just wanted to mention some of those things. And then I would go on to say this: that not only do they have that conviction, but they also engaged in their culture. And these can kind of be like, well, aren't these competing against each other? And it, to a degree, maybe. But these guys, they learned the culture around them. They learned everything that they needed to learn. They learned the languages. They learned the way in which the laws were structured. They learned about the pagan practices of the gods of Babylon. I'm certain that would have been a part of it. And so they engaged themselves into the culture. They didn't become a part of it in every aspect and every way. And some people would say it this way in our modern vernacular: they were in the world, not of the world. And so we have to wrestle with that too. So we need to understand the culture in which we live. That's just the reality. And so we need to understand the philosophies that drive people to do what they do. We need to understand the religions that drive people to do what they do. We need to think about these things. We need to understand where people are coming from, where their sources of truth are, so that we can effectively share the gospel with them. And so that's what I mean by that point, that they engaged in the culture. We need to engage in the culture as well. They were hard workers. I think that's another point of nobility for these guys. They didn't just like say, okay, God, give me that osmosis and teach me Akkadian and teach me the different laws of this particular land. No, they hit the books in a sense. And they, for 3 years, studied, immersed themselves in these things, and they learned. And we have to work hard. Following Jesus is hard work. Sharing our faith with others and doing that work of the kingdom of Christ in this land of Babylon is hard work. And so I would encourage you, whatever you do, do it heartily unto the Lord. And then finally, these guys were men of faith. Already hit on that a little bit, and we're going to hit on that time and time again as we consider some of these stories that are coming up. Their faith in God is a something to aspire to for me and for us. And so I'm looking forward to some of that being spelled out as we move forward. One final thought that I was just encouraged in as I was reading a commentary was that there are some in more of the academia and those who are scholarly on these issues that actually look at Daniel and these first chapters as wisdom literature. And I thought that was really interesting because wisdom literature is the stuff of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. It's how to live and what wise living looks like in the world. And of course, those are more maybe pithy and small sayings. But what you see in these narratives of Daniel are illustrations of wisdom literature. It's being applied in their life. And I thought, that's true. These guys, by their actions, are living that out in such a way that I can understand why it would be designated to a degree as wisdom literature. So, guys, I'm 19 minutes deep into this video. You can see why I didn't want to add this on a Sunday morning. And if you've made it this far, congratulations. But I appreciate you all, and I'm excited to move into Daniel 2 this next week. So this week, read Daniel 2. In preparation, we're not going to be able to read that whole chapter on Sunday morning. It's relatively long. And then also read 1 Peter this week. Read about our exile. Read about us being sojourners here in this land of Babylon. God bless you, and we will see you later this week.